Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you so much, Vicky. Really exciting to get connected with you all, and really, I think the work you guys are doing is so meaningful, especially in a time like this. And when you mentioned about how COVID has disrupted everything and so much has changed, I could totally resonate with that, and that's why I think the work you all are doing is so interesting. So yeah, I think really good to be here. Really good to not see everyone, but be here. And today I'm going to share about this theme of intrinsic motivation. And I think this is quite a vast theme. And I think like what I'll be able to do today is just give you an introduction and maybe get your toes wet in the beach, so to say, right? So to sort of maybe invite you into like finding out more for yourself. So hopefully this is something that you find inspiring and interesting, as I have. Right. So one of the things today we're in this learning summit, and all of us interested in learning. So teachers, school leaders, parents, students, whoever you are, if you're interested in learning, one of the things I've noticed about us in this learning community, right? In this sort of nurturing, like this community of people who all want to learn. One of the things I've noticed about us is that we are um, we're overly obsessed with behavior. I don't know if you've noticed that, right? Like if you see the like we have in a classroom, we want the child to behave in a certain way, right? We want uh, everything, like the lesson, the 90 minutes or the 60 minutes of the lesson to be planned in a certain way. It should go in a certain way. We are obsessed with behavior, and this really hit me recently, when I was reading this book on parenting, and it's one of the bestsellers. I'll not name it, but like the author, right in the introduction, he kind of makes this point, and he says this is the task of parenting, and these are the two major tasks of parenting. And then he says, number one, it is to encourage good behavior in children. And number two, it is to discourage bad behavior in your children. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, this is such an impoverished view of parenting, right? Because if you think about it, there is so much happening in a parent child relationship. I myself have a 3.5-year-old son. And, like, if you think about it, it's such a close relationship, such a intimate relationship. You share a name, you share a DNA, your identity is connected, and like so much is together, right? But somehow we reduce that whole relationship into just this, behavior modification, and I'm just looking to change your behavior. And I think everything in education, often we get so obsessed with these behaviors, how children behave in a class, how they behave with one another, how they like perform a certain task, how they read, write, all these kind of things. We get very obsessed with these behaviors, right? And one of the things that happens when you get obsessed with behavior is that you automatically also get obsessed with rewards and punishments, right? So you always get obsessed with what, how can I reward this behavior, because we get this assumption, right, that okay, I need to, the way that I change behavior is that I reward good behavior and I punish bad behavior. So then we get obsessed with rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior, right? And what I'm here to share, right, is that this, if you might like in the learning world, I think we've come to some sort of consensus where we say that okay, the maybe it's not good. Corporal punishment is not good. Like we need to not go into corporal punishment, right? And maybe we've also come into some consensus that okay, teachers, parents need to be careful about the words we use. So any kind of punishment, that it shouldn't break down a child, right? Those kind of things. But we still have this sort of overall model where we're trying to change the behavior of the child with rewards, punishments, maybe slighter punishments, discipline, whatever we call them, right? But this is what I'm here to share, right? the thing is, this entire model of changing behavior through rewards and punishment is something that almost 40 to 50 years back, a lot of researchers actually like did a lot of research on this, and they said that this is actually an outdated model and it really does not work. And they talked about how rewards and punishments really worked in a time when you're looking for compliance, right? When you have when you have an assembly line, when you have specific work that needs to be done in a specific way, and you're creating children, citizens for that, then it kind of works, right? Rewards and punishments. But in the kind of world we're living in, the COVID disrupted, in the kind of like ambiguous world we're living in, we all, we need people who are very creative, who are critical thinkers, who can adapt to whatever challenges come, and in that kind of situation, these researchers almost 40 to 50 years back, they said that actually rewards and punishments don't really work. Both rewards and punishments don't work, right? And I think one of the really interesting experiments that they did, I'll share that with you. It was done by two Israeli psychologists, and they did it in this early childhood center, where daycare centers, right? And they looked at all these children, and they found that there were a lot of children who really liked drawing, right? So they found that in the free time, these children would just start to draw, right? So they isolated these children, they brought them to another place, and they divided them into three groups, right? And so the first group, Group A, they told these children, okay, we want you to draw, and when you draw, once you draw, you will get a certificate, right? And they showed them the certificate. It had like beautiful blue ribbons and all that. So that was Group A. And then Group B, they again asked them to draw, but they didn't tell them anything, right? They didn't talk to them about any reward. They just said, why don't you draw? And then once they had drawn, this group was given a certificate, right? So they were given a reward, but it was unexpected. It was an unexpected reward. So Group A was expected reward, Group B was unexpected reward, and Group C was this group of children who was a no reward group, right? So there was no reward mentioned and there was no reward given. They were just asked to draw, right? So this was the group. They did this little experiment with these young children who liked to draw, right? And then what they did was, after this experiment was done, they gave a break of only 2 weeks, and they came back into that same classroom and they started observing these same children, right? And what they noticed was this, right? The group which had no reward, those children were still drawing in their free time, right? In the free time, they were still drawing, they were doodling, they were enjoying themselves. The one which had an unexpected reward, right? They were also doing the same thing. But they found that this group which had an expected reward, right? Somehow these children no longer wanted to draw, right? So they were just not interested in drawing anymore. And so they looked at this and they said, there's something about this reward that has actually not helped the child. It has actually been damaging. It has not really helped the child. And if you think about it, it's kind of like this, right? Like if you like when you're growing up, let's say, if your dad comes and tells you you need to clean your room, and then you might just clean your room because your dad says so, or you might actually decide to clean your room and really beautifully set it up, right? But suppose if a parent says to the child, clean your room and I will give you 50 rupees for it, right? So then I will clean the room and I'll get 50 rupees for it. But then if tomorrow someone comes and tells me just clean the room, I may not be interested in doing it because I think somehow that I will clean the room for that 50 rupees, right? And otherwise, why should I clean the room? The task itself is not very meaningful for me, right? So I think like what we've somehow done within education and within learning is that because of this obsession we have with rewards and punishment, we've somehow taken the joy, the intrinsic joy out of certain tasks of learning, right? And we've become very good at actually, if you look at a child, when the child is born, the child is beautiful, like, the child loves exploring, the child is curious, wants to learn, wants to open up a toy and fiddle with it and tinker with it, right? And then by the time, we this obsession with rewards and punishments, right, and the tests we give, we find that the child is not really that curious anymore, right? Something about the way we have done education is, destroying their love for learning, right? So this should really make us think, right? If you think about it, the point I want to make, and the point that these researchers made, say 40 to 50 years back with the science of motivation, was that they said what matters more, is not whether some change has happened, right? It's not whether the child has taken up this behavior or that behavior or is doing this or doing that, but it matters if the change is intrinsically motivated. As in, like, if the child finds it valuable in its own right, right? Or a teacher changes their teaching style, but not because somebody else is saying, but because they find it valuable in their own right. So it's more important that the change is intrinsically motivated and not extrinsically motivated, right? So if I was to give you an example, um, if I get my child, if I get my son to read today, if I get my son to just sit in one place and read today, right, and I've controlled his behavior, I've enforced that behavior, and he sits down and reads, right? But in the pursuit of this, if I destroy his long term desire to read, what's the point, right? What have I done? Right? Or if I have a classroom full of children, and if I'm able to get them all well behaved and quiet, and if they're reading in the way I want and doing some math in the way I want, but if I've destroyed their long-term desire to learn these things, then what's the point of what I've done, right? And so what these researchers said is that they said that if we focus too much on this short term and on behavior control, we can actually end up doing a lot of long term damage, right? So if you have this like excessive focus on, I want my child to write in this way, I want my child to present his essay in this way, or I want my child to solve the problem in this way, or if you're in a school, if you think that I want my teacher to teach in this way, right, or whatever it is, right? The If there's a lot of focus on short-term behavior control, what we can do is that we can do considerable long-term damage, because you might lose the intrinsic motivation of that person, right? It could be a child, it could be an adult. So this is why I think, like, those researchers, 40, 50 years back itself, and this is something that's, been tried out in various fields. They say that it's important that we focus on intrinsic motivation, because the thing that really sets apart a person is not something that is, imposed on them in terms of a reward and a punishment. But what really motivates a person is what comes from within them, right? So what is intrinsic to them. And so they said that, it's important that we focus on these three pillars of intrinsic motivation, right? And so the first pillar is the pillar of autonomy, and that is the freedom to self-direct. I think we'll all know this, like, we are all motivated when we have a certain level of autonomy, right? If we have a certain level of autonomy of, I can do it this way, I can do it that way, I can do it this time or that time, I can do it with this person or that person. When we have that sort of certain amount of autonomy, a freedom to self-direct, that brings a lot of intrinsic motivation. So the question whether if you're a teacher, you're a parent, in whatever capacity you're doing learning is, do you promote autonomy, or do you actually promote more control? That's something for us to think of, right? Second pillar is mastery, right? And mastery is this desire to get better and better at something that matters, right? So if you look at a child, like who uh, suddenly you'll see children, when they suddenly get engrossed in something and they just lost, they're unaware of the surroundings, and that's what psychologists call the state of flow, right, where they're so engrossed in it that they are completely enjoying it, they're getting better and better at something that matters, right? That's the whole pursuit of mastery. And mastery is like a long term, like all through life phenomena, right? But as teachers and as people in education, I think the question for us is to ask the question, do we create these environments of mastery, where our children get that complete engagement, completely engaged with something that matters to them, right? And they can like slowly start to master, right? Or is it something that, whether it matters to them or not, they still have to do it, right? And it's not something that is defined by them, but defined by us. That's the second pillar of intrinsic motivation, which is mastery. And the third pillar, which brings these two together, is the pillar of purpose, right? The activative energy of a life with purpose, which is, as a child or as any learner, right? You might be in college, you might be whatever age you're in. And even for us, like when we learn, I think like a huge part of it is to know the purpose, right? What is this all about, right? What is this all leading to? Right? So as a learner, for us to be intrinsically motivated, we need some amount of autonomy, freedom to self-direct, right? We need this. We need to be able to get engaged so we are growing in our mastery, and we need it all to fit into a larger purpose, right? I think that's the sort of pillars of intrinsic motivation. So if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, or if it's just for yourself, I'd encourage you to think, of, when you work with your child, when you work with your student, do you promote autonomy, mastery, and purpose? And if you do, then what you're doing is you're actually creating a fertile ground for the child's motivation itself to start to bubble up, right? And I think that's what motivation experts say is the way to go, instead of an obsession with controlling short-term behavior, right? And so when we are motivated to learn, I think like something gets unleashed, right? Which is much more powerful than can be unleashed with the fear of punishment or some expectation of a short-term reward, right? So I hope this has just given you a taste of what intrinsic motivation is, and also given you a taste of what it can do. I think in our work in education with government school teachers, we've seen really the power of this, of how an intrinsically motivated teacher can really change a whole classroom, a whole community. Right? So I'm going to stop there, but I'm going to give a shout out to two books, uh, a book called Drive by Daniel Pink and a book called Intrinsic by Sharad Jeevan. I think these are both books on intrinsic motivation. I highly recommend for you to check it out. Thank you so much. Thank you, with you once more, and all the best for turning to